In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander the Great launched his famous campaign in Asia. His first significant battle against the Persians took place at Granicus, where he won a decisive victory and gained control of northwestern Asia Minor. After conquering the Greek cities along the Aegean coast of Asia Minor in the summer of the same year, he moved from Miletus via Iassos and Bargilia into the province of Curia with the aim of conquering Halicarnassus, the capital of this region. On his way he met the exiled Princess Ada, who laid claim to rule in Halicarnassus and adopted Alexander to legitimize his claims to Curia. The siege of Halicarnassus presented Alexander with an enormous challenge. The city was heavily fortified and served as a base of operations for the Persian forces under the command of the mercenary general Memnon of Rhodes. Since Alexander had to disband his own fleet due to high costs, he was unable to attack the city from the sea. In addition to the city walls, three other defenses, the Acropolis and the fortresses of Salmacis and Zephyrion, were strategically positioned to protect the city. Halicarnassus was defended by a mix of Persian troops and Greek mercenaries who had previously fled Athens. Alexander set up camp opposite the Mylasa Gate at the northeastern end of the city walls. Since his siege engines were slowly transported behind the army, he was unable to launch any direct attacks in the first few days. Instead, he had to fend off occasional failures from the defenders. After a few days, he decided to take the port city of Mindos, located about 20 kilometers west of Halicarnassus. Although Mindos had little strategic value, it offered itself as a potential ally, assuming Alexander could take the city under cover of night. But when his troops reached Mindos, the city gates were locked and the walls were occupied by fighters from Halicarnassus. Since the siege of Mindos took too much time and resources and Alexander needed the men more urgently to conquer Halicarnassus, he broke off the siege and returned to his camp, where the siege engines had now arrived.
Kill them, and I'll buy you as many whores as you can eat! The enemy? Whores and worse, a lot of them. I've been thinking, would you strike a holy man? This is hot work! Bloody old son!
After the ditch in front of the northeastern section of the city wall of Halicarnassus had been filled and leveled, Alexander was finally able to bring in his siege engines. First, he used siege towers with archers to drive the defenders away from the walls. This enabled the use of battering rams, which were used to destroy a long section of the wall after a few days. However, before the Macedonians could enter the city, Memnon and his troops made a night sortie to set fire to the siege engines. After a fierce battle, the defenders were repelled, killing many of them, including a Macedonian defector named Neoptolemus, whose family was implicated in the murder of Philip II. On the Macedonian side, there were 16 dead and 300 injured, as well as losses in towers and shelters. In the days that followed, occasional skirmishes broke out as the defenders closed the breach in the wall with an improvised semicircular wall and tower. One night, two drunken peasanters from Perdiccas' battalion led an uncoordinated attack on the new wall, giving Memnon the opportunity to destroy a Macedonian unit. However, Alexander was able to save the situation, but had to admit defeat and ask for the fallen soldiers to be returned for burial. Despite the defensive successes, Memnon recognized that a decisive battle was inevitable. He formed his troops into 3 waves of attack, while the defenders pressed the Macedonians' flank. Led by Ptolemy, the Macedonians managed to push back the defenders, with Ephialtes falling. The defenders closed the gates too early, causing many of them to fall to their deaths in front of the center gate as the bridge over the moat collapsed. Over 1,000 defenders died in the battle, while the Macedonians suffered only 40 casualties. The battle ultimately decided the battle for Halicarnassus in Alexander's favor. Faced with heavy losses, Memnon decided to abandon the city and move the fleet to Kos. The fortifications were supposed to be set on fire, but this triggered unforeseen fires in the city. Orontopates intended to hold the port fortresses of Salmaches and Zephyrion in order to entrench himself there. In the autumn of 334 BC, after a months-long siege, Alexander finally managed to enter Halicarnassus. The arsonists he managed to catch were executed, while the residents were spared. Not planning to stay in the city longer than necessary, Alexander stationed a garrison of 3,000 infantry and 200 cavalry under the command of Ptolemy, possibly identical to Ptolemy, son of Philip, who would act as strategos to ensure the security of the Caria region. Although the two port fortresses were still under Persian control and the conquest was not completely complete, Alexander continued his march eastward into Asia Minor. His main goal, the neutralization of the port of Halicarnassus as a base for the Persian fleet, had finally been achieved. The threat from them diminished, especially after the death of Memnon and the resumption of operations by the Macedonian Greek fleet in the Aegean. A year later, in the fall of 333 BC, the last battle for Halicarnassus took place when Ptolemy and the satrap Asandros defeated Orontopates in a decisive battle. 700 Orontopates infantrymen and 50 cavalrymen fell, while another 1,000 fighters were captured. Orontopates then gave up the harbor fortresses and fled to the court of the Persian king Darius III. Alexander learned of this victory at Soloi in Cilicia, just days before the Battle of Issus.